Hello, everyone. Welcome to PowerUp, a podcast that is all about personal growth and professional development. No matter where you are right now in life, at work, in university, in between jobs, we have a little something for you. And I really hope you enjoy our conversation today because we have a very, very special guest with us today. And we are going to be talking about workplace wellness. How do we treat employees as humans and not just a human resource? The Power Up podcast is brought to you by MIDP, a leading and award-winning human capital development institute on a mission to improve soft skills competencies amongst professionals and students. And together with us, we have Thrive Well, a social enterprise pioneering trauma-informed mental health services to build a more resilient Malaysia. You might be wondering, why are we talking about mental health today? Why is Thrive Well in the house with us today? And we are very happy to share that MIDP and Thrive Well have just entered into a partnership where we have decided to leverage on each other's expertise in order to serve our stakeholders better. And mostly we're talking about corporate Malaysia as well as professionals across industries. And in our conversation today, we will zoom in specifically to talk about mental health, mental well-being in the context of the workplace, and how do we help leaders, HR, and all of these stakeholders in the context of the workplace, how do we treat people better, and how do we make sure that they can, flourish in the context of the workplace and not just surviving on a day-to-day basis. So without further ado, let's dive into our first conversation for today. And I want to start on a personal note, which is about wellness and what it means. But before that, you must know who am I asking this question to, and why is she the best person for me to ask this question. So we have with us today Amalina Davies, and she is the Director of Consultancy and Training with Thrive Well. And throughout her input today, I'm pretty sure you will learn a lot more about Thrive Well and the work that they do. So Lynn, what has wellness meant to you personally, especially in your own journey as a professional as well as a leader?
Thank you, Em, for having me at the podcast today. I'm really excited to talk about this topic of wellness because it's something that I hold very close to my heart, both personally and professionally. So personally, I've had the experience of caregiving for my late dad, who was a bipolar patient. So he was diagnosed with bipolar at a very young age, in his 20s, and he's lived with bipolar for most of his life. So understanding that, I guess, mental illness is kind of genetically predisposed in my genes. So I take extra care of my mental health. And that's something that I try and advocate, not just in personally, so like having self-care activities through regular meditation. I do regular yoga, reflection, but also physical side. So doing regular exercises, having good nutrition. So looking after my mental health is something that I try and model with my team members as well, right? Because when the leaders set the tone, when they see leaders model good mental health behaviors, that's something that they take on as well in their work as professionals. So that's how I pivoted my corporate career actually to join Thrive Well, a mental health social enterprise, because of the experience of being a caregiver to my late dad.
I think that's wonderful. And in my experience, talking to a lot of leaders, some might be a little more aware on like how do you keep your team members healthy and, keeping their wellness up. But there's also some that feel that why are we doing this? This is an, additional thing that I have to do on top of my project KPIs. Sounds impossible to do in the context of the workplace, right? And I had this thought a while back, and that is, in order for leaders, or in order for us to build leaders or nurture leaders that care about mental health, there must be a personal why as to, why is it important for them? And if you as a leader don't recognize that it is important, I think it's quite hard for you to do the things that you mentioned, like modeling it to your team members and making sure you treat them as a human first before you treat them as just an employee or a team member, right? And I had a similar journey. I think the moment in which I realized that being sensitized to the very least is very important was a while back. I think I was also working corporate at the time, and my mother has been sick for about 6 to 8 months at the time, and then she eventually passed away. And when I told my boss at the time about it, and she knew my mother has been unwell, she knew because I can no longer pull the extra hours at work. So I will have to leave. I mean, I will do my work extra hours if necessary, but I will be doing it at a hospital instead of staying in the office. So when my mom passed, and I told her over text that I'm so sorry, I will have to skip work today. And the reason is because my mom just passed away. And her response to me was, sorry to hear this. Can you please talk to Effie and make sure that the work is managed well? That's it. And I was quite surprised to read that because I was like, did you miss the part where I told you my mother just passed away? And I think that really sparked this question in my brain at the time. And that is, why is it that leaders, when your team member tells you something that is personal, something that is about maybe their mental state or the challenges that they are facing, leaders often just go straight into the corporate answer, and we don't take the time to acknowledge that this is a personal thing or this is a difficult thing, and we just go straight into, but the work has to be done, which I agree, and we go straight into that kind of responses. And I think from that point onwards, it becomes very important to me that in every conversation you have with your team members, with other leaders, that before you respond as a leader, you respond as a human being first. And you kind of like acknowledge and validate the feelings. And I think that is something that has also been a personal mission to me. And I think, I'm pretty sure that is something that you do as well, right? In what way do you kind of model this with your current team? Like, for example, when they come to you and they say something, oh, Amalina, I'm really struggling with something, or I'm really stressed out, this client is really difficult. How would you respond to your team?
Yeah, I think thanks for sharing that story. I think it really hits close to home, and I would just wanted to highlight like why perhaps this is the case. A lot of leaders, they feel awkward to address the personal because in our Asian culture, right, there's always kind of that separation. This is my professional self and this is my personal self. And they feel like kind of crossing the boundary is not something they're comfortable in. So I've heard actually a lot of these kind of comments when we go and meet our corporate clients, and they just say, my manager just doesn't understand. My manager just doesn't care about the other hats that I wear to work, because an employee is a whole holistic person, right? An employee is not just the employee of this company. They're also a wife, they're also a mother, they're also a friend, they're also a caregiver. And so having these multiple hats and acknowledging it is what actually employees want in the workplace. And that's where it starts, like with the leader being able to kind of see all the different roles an employee has is the starting point, because that brings awareness to the different responsibilities that they may carry. And that is how you start the conversation of asking, not just checking in about their work, but checking in about their mental state. So this is where actually genuinely, where a person feels genuinely cared for, is when you check in, how are you doing today? How's your mother today? And don't do it only when it's a crisis point. Doing it on a regular basis.
Betul.
Right? It takes a few seconds to ask before you start a conversation. So this is something that we try to do in our teams, right? In Thrive Well. We try to model that behavior in every of our meetings. The first 5 minutes is just casual chats, right? Just kind of like, how's everyone doing?
Like a
How was your
mental
weekend?
health check-in.
Yes. And we also have the regular mental health check-in. So we have the team check-ins, but as a leader, we make it a practice to have it on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, to do those regular one-on-one individual check-ins with your direct supervisee. So this is where we start to pick up, like if we notice that, during those check-ins, they highlighted that, their parent is in and out of hospital. So then as a leader, we take note that, okay, they might be not able to kind of fulfill all the responsibilities, and you plan ahead. So this is the role as the leader, is for you to plan ahead in case this happens. So how do you distribute the workload?
Faham?
Across your other team members?
I think when we do training on emotional intelligence with our clients, there's this situation that I like to read out to them, and I will ask them, do you think this person has high emotional intelligence or low emotional intelligence? And I'm going to give you like the gist of what the situation is. So maybe let's call this person Suraya. So Suraya is a high performer in a team, and she is often assigned, very important, high pressure, high reward kind of projects. And one of the projects, so one day she had a very difficult conversation with her client, and she was challenged and she was not supported and all of that, and she broke down crying during the meeting itself. And that was the situation. So we will ask the leaders, oh, do you think Suraya has high emotional intelligence or low emotional intelligence? And you would be surprised that over 90% of every single session that we have done this, they will say that Suraya has low emotional intelligence. And when I ask them, why is that? And they will always zoom into this point, because she cried. This is the workplace. Why are you crying, at work? And I want to build on something that you said, like leaders have to kind of like plan ahead, but also picking out this clues, I guess, along the way. Like, for example, in this situation, the understanding is that there is no space for negative emotions at work. And I notice this not just in Asia, but also across the world, that people always say, if you were to show any kind of negative emotions, it's unprofessional. You shouldn't be doing that. So when you walk to the office, you enter into your lobby, and you let go of all of this emotion, and you're only allowed to feel, I don't know what, because you can't also be too happy, I guess. So expecting people to leave the personal outside or before they get to work is I think a very harmful thing to do, because again, it's building on what you said. You have to treat the person as a whole holistic individual, right? So a part of that is who they are and the challenges that they have gone through as well. And I think this is a part of the turning point as well for us when it comes to realizing how important it is to make sure that mental health and mental wellness is also a part of your role as a leader. So having said that, right, we could both agree that there is an increasing kind of awareness on the importance of mental health. But wellness until today is still treated like a perk rather than something that is important, rather than a business priority. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think first I would like to acknowledge that there has been a sharp increase in mental health awareness in the workplace. And I'm just referring this based on my short 4 years that I've been in mental health, which is pre-COVID and now. Like, we can see the demand of mental health services. Companies are reaching out. The demand is a lot higher. So now they are the one proactively reaching out to us to ask about our mental health services. Back in the day, before COVID, it was the other way around. We would be the ones approaching companies, and most of the time it's reluctance that we get, resistance. Companies like, why should we spend on this? And I think a lot of that is, that's still the very traditional view of what you mentioned, the separation between work and personal, and the traditional view of putting in extra hours means that you're committed to your work. So the longer you spend at the office, the more committed you are to the work. And then they see, oh, there's also this, I think this is an Asian thing as well. You see your boss, they haven't left the office, then you cannot go back.
Yes.
Right? So, and this is actually very harmful, because when that kind of modeling happens from a leader, then they think that's the expectations that they set, right? And I think sometimes maybe perhaps more traditional type of leadership seems to focus more on the short-term performance. So they are more driven by quarterly results, right? So the way businesses are set up in corporate, it's all about quarterly results, especially if you're a public listed company. So when it's very short-term driven, then you are just chasing numbers for the quarter. Things like mental health benefits, which are longer-term investment, they seem to go out the window first, right? Because that is not our priority. Our priority is hitting that KPI, hitting that sales target, right? So investing in things like flexible working hours, flexible work policies, it feels like a luxury rather than a necessity. But having said that, I would also like to acknowledge that some companies genuinely do want to do better. And I see this in a lot of the HR that I speak to, right? They show a genuine concern. with their employees' mental well-being, and they see it because HR is the first one to notice actually when there's a drop in this performance. No, sorry, I take that back. It's actually the managers first notice, and then the managers escalate to HR, and then HR will come to us, right? So when they notice this, they approach us, they're kind of at a loss. Like, I know this is an issue, but what do I do? How can I address this? Because mental health is still something that it's hard to quantify. So what ends up happening is these companies will start offering very surface level perks. So things like, once a year during World Mental Health Month, they will do a wellness talk. They will do a wellness workshop once or twice a year. And they think that's the L&D that they do, learning and development, is going to cover up all of these issues already. But the problem with that, you're not addressing the root cause. You're not changing the deeper issues that underlie mental health issues, like high work expectations, like
unfair distribution of workload, unfair working hours.
Yes, and communication styles. For example, not changing how you talk to your superior. Just changing this little, what people say little, but this is how you make longer term sustainable changes.
I think that's an excellent point. When we talk about this need to separate between your personal life and how you are at work, I think it's important to look back at the history of, how did we come with this corporate structure? Why is it like this, right? I think that question is very important. And I remember reading this article about that explains the reason corporate structure was, created this way was because when the world was moving towards industrialization from the first industrial revolution up until 4.0 now, a lot of these things back in the day was a response to post-war, and therefore a lot of these structures are borrowed from the military. Hence, you will have things like, when you're at work, you just follow orders. You don't ask questions. You don't, talk back to your superior. You don't speak up. And the expectation to just be this void, this empty vessel of productivity and performance. And I think that we carry these things with us up until today, but clearly it doesn't work anymore. But also because, number one, we are not in the military. And number two, I think the times have changed, and generally society have a bigger awareness on mental health and things like that. And a lot of these things that we still carry until today, when you ask leaders, right, why is it that they have to do it a certain way? Why is it that you expect them to behave this way? And they don't have an answer for it. So a lot of the time it's, I don't know, it has always been this way, and therefore any kind of difference to what we are used to is considered as unprofessional. And I think that creates a bigger problem. It exaggerates the problem that we have right now. So when we talk about these unhealthy environments, right, that we put our employees in, this expectation that comes from the military and the structure that we borrowed from there, I think it puts our employees or even ourselves in a position where we have to take on unhealthy coping mechanisms, and we basically just don't know how to assess anymore. How do we know if we're okay? How do we know if emotionally I'm still having stress response or trauma response? And a lot of people don't know this. So I want to ask you this question. What can you tell me something that perhaps ThriveWell is doing that can help employees identify these things, or even HR? Is there any kind of metrics or assessment that we can use to help with this?
I really like what you mentioned about the unhealthy coping mechanisms, right? Because that's essentially what happens when you put employees in an unhealthy environment. So putting them in a workplace that is expecting them to be a soulless human being that just performs and produces output is unhealthy for the emotional side, right, and the mental side. So this results in unhealthy coping mechanisms, and this is what they observed in the US actually in the 70s or 80s. Alcohol addiction started to go really up, and drug addiction in the workplace. And especially if you're at that time, it's still an industrial revolution, right? So a lot of heavy machinery working in factories, and alcohol addiction and drug addiction is a serious problem when you bring that into a space where there's a lot of moving parts, high risk of injury, even death. So that's how the Employee Assistance Program was born in the US during that time. It is actually to address the alcohol addiction issues. And it has kind of expanded since then. So to include not just addiction issues, there are also any mental health concern you are able to raise through the EAP, and you can talk to mental health professionals and counselors. So now, over the years, it's been more than half a century since EAP was born, it has evolved into providing all angles for the employee. So in the US, where this originated from, it provides not just the mental health support, it provides financial literacy, for example, legal advice. So if someone is going through, for example, some property issues and they need some legal advice, the EAP also provides that. In some countries, also childcare, because they know that this concept of the whole person approach, an individual is having multiple roles in their life, and how can we assist them in all the different roles they are, rather than just them at work. So when ThriveWell, this is essentially what ThriveWell provides to companies. We provide employee assistance program, but we focus more on the mental health because we are a mental health provider. So in Malaysia and a lot of the Asian countries, we haven't evolved, our EAP hasn't evolved to the level where it provides all this holistic other areas. So it's very much focused in mental and physical health. So what we do is when we enter a company, we meet with the HR and the leaders, and then we try and assess what is their level of mental health literacy, what is their severity of mental health issues. So we do this via many different ways. So we can do mental health screenings. So we give out validated questionnaires to test, to assess what is the current level of mental health, and if there's certain departments that are more high risk. So usually what we notice is the customer-facing departments are high risk. Anyone has to do with the customer, and usually
Unhappy customers,
yeah, like screaming customers, so that is where the stress levels are. So versus, for example, finance or like IT, where you don't deal with customers as much. So we assess all these different matrices, and then we come up with a program that will suit that company, right? So, and we do it via tiers. So if this company is more at the lower level of mental health awareness, so we do more of the awareness level of mental health. So like we do talks, we do panel discussions like this, just to kind of bring the conversation of mental health into that space. But sometimes the companies are more higher up the tier, so then we can provide more specialized skills. So we can start building, for example, peer supporter inside the organization. So peer supporters are essentially your colleagues who want to help other colleagues that are struggling, but they don't necessarily need to be, for example, a counselor. So we teach them those skills to attend to a person. So EAP is essentially a very structured way of implementing mental health within an organization.
So basically, if let's say I'm a leader and I notice maybe signs of burnout or maybe signs of like unhealthy communication, which stems from perhaps feelings of resentment or stuff like that. So I can reach out to my HR and we can reach out to ThriveWell, and you will come and you will assess the team members.
Yes.
Or does it always have to be like company wide, or can it be like one person only? Can it be like a team of 5? What is the scale of it all for EAP?
Usually we would recommend company-wide, because to really address the root causes that are causing unhealthy mental health behaviors, it is a cultural thing. So when you do it in a smaller group, the impact is not felt across the entire organization. So we would recommend an entire organization, but we've also done team-wise. So for example, it might take longer if HR has to do it for an organization of 1,000 people. So sometimes we also get teams like sales team approaching us. So we only do it for the sales team. So the approach is different if you do it with a department versus an entire organization. Because when it's an entire organization, there's a lot of complexity in the different departments that are approaching you. So you might have to do it, you address the high-risk departments first before you...
So it's a bit more gradual as well.
Yes.
With that regard. I want to build on something that you said earlier, and that is sometimes the nature of the job, this high stress, high reward environment makes you feel like, I guess unsafe, and is causing a lot of distress, right? But on the other hand, I think it's also true that you could have like the chillest job on earth, but you could have a manager that makes your work so hard where you feel like unsupported, like the workplace feels hostile. Not just that you're not supported, if anything were to go wrong, you get thrown under the bus, you have team members that try to sabotage you, for example, and like passive aggressiveness in conversations. And I think this is also like a huge part of mental health at work, right? Because it's not just about projects that stress you out, but it's environments that stress you out as well. And one of the things that we do is when we talk about psychological safety at MIDP is to realize that the biggest change that could happen is actually in middle management. And there's this idea that, like most things, if it were going to break, it will break in the middle. And that is why a lot of the conversations or programs or interventions that we do actually tackles middle management, because we believe in the idea or in the concept of leadership environment. So when you work with corporates, right, and they will come to us, they will say, I want to do culture transformation. I want people to speak up. I want people to be more innovative and all of these things. And they will ask me, how do I change the culture of an organization? And I will ask them back this question, which will usually make them feel like, what is she saying? And the question I will ask them is, how are you changing the leadership culture of each of your middle managers and senior managers? Because you can do all sorts of digital transformation to change culture, but if the leadership culture or the leadership environment of individual leaders from middle management onwards, if those things don't change, the reality for every employee and every team member will not change. So the company as a whole can champion speaking up and safe space, for example. But if the leaders don't know how to change their habits, the way they speak, the way they treat their team members, then this culture will never trickle down in a way that is felt by majority of your individual contributors, right? A majority of your employees. So there's this story that I like to borrow from Simon Sinek about this boy. He works in two different workplaces. He works in a hotel, and in one hotel he just basically does whatever it is to just get through the day, keep his head down, try not to get in trouble, just collect his paycheck at the end of the day. But in another hotel where he has the same exact job scope, which is he is a barista, and he is like this really charming person, will talk to his customers, engage in conversation, and really there's this sense of genuine or I think in Malaysia we would call it ikhlas, like when you do the work. And he was very curious about this, and when he asked this person why the difference, and this person said that, well, because in one organization, I feel like it's safe for me to be myself. And in the other organization, I feel like I have to, walk around eggshells and things like that. And this creates this very important turning point in the work that we do. And that is oftentimes when we have a problematic team member because they're not performing in some ways, they're not participating at a level in which we expect, not proactive enough, we will always say, you know what, this person has a bit of an attitude problem, or this employee has a bit of a work discipline issues and stuff like that. And the problem with that is never have we created this awareness amongst our leaders to stop and ask, what is it in my leadership environment that is causing my team to behave this way? Because more often than not, it is your leadership environment, the way that you talk to your team, the way that you treat your team members is making them behave the way they are behaving. So they checked out of work, they don't perform, they do just enough, just the bare minimum to collect their paycheck at the end of the month. And this is important, and a lot of these conversations are becoming more mainstream. So there is a shift in the way that we talk about, mental health, burnout, disengagement in the context of work. And a huge part of this shift, I think, has to be supported with tools like the EAP, because otherwise leaders would not have this insight, right? So I want to ask you a bit more specifically about how can we utilize EAP to create a better culture in general. So not just in response to problems or when people are already burnt out, perhaps something that is a little more proactive. So how does this work?
I really like that powerful story that you shared by Simon Sinek, and I think that can be further supported by, I was looking at some statistics about how your mental health of an employee is more affected by managers and leaders than their own doctors or even therapists. Yeah. So it's at the same level, your mental health of an employee is at the same level being impacted by their spouse. Their managers is the same level as their spouse.
Wait, so I mean, I guess it makes sense, right? Because you spend 8 hours or more
Exactly.
of your day at work. It's only natural that this exposure you have to your boss, to your leader, will affect you
Yeah.
as much as your partner, as you say. So how can we use EAP for this?
Yeah. So coming back to how powerful these managers and leaders in terms of affecting the mental health of the employees, then it's actually up to the managers or leaders to model that good behavior of mental health in the workplace. And how we do that actually, we like to use storytelling in EAP. So a lot of people, when we enter a company, especially if the mental health awareness is quite low, then they feel like they can't relate to it. Like, why do I have to attend this training? I begrudgingly have to drag myself to this training that HR sent me to, right? So we try to make it relatable through leaders sharing their own personal story. And I like to use this example of one of our clients who has a very strong advocate, mental health advocate, as their CEO. And he was the one who brought our EAP team into the organization. So a bit of context, it's a multinational organization. So he's actually an expat boss who came from the UK office to the Malaysian office and became CEO. So he was the one who started the mental health first aid program in the UK. So he wanted to do the same, with bringing EAP into the Malaysian office. And the staff members, of course, were like, why are we doing this? Like, and at the same time, he asked the HSE to do it, HSE team. They're like, they're used to more of the kind of
Physical
health and safety,
dangers, yeah.
right? So like, why is mental health parked under my department? So not much understanding with this, but at the launch of our EAP program, he actually came and did an opening remark, and that's when he shared his own. So he was rising up through the ranks. He struggled with his own mental health concerns, and he went through burnout, and he had to seek out for mental health professional help. And at the time, because he also talked about his personal side, so he was a father at that time, young kids. So that pressure of his personal life together with his professional life as he's climbing up the corporate ladder really took a toll on his own mental health. And at the same time, in one of his employees, I think there was a completed suicide case inside the organization. So that's when he really realized, this is so important, and especially the high pressure environment. It was a very male dominated industry, and men don't talk about their emotions, right? Especially, with more of a toxic masculinity narrative in some of these organizations. So anyway, he was then a powerful advocate, and he talked about it so openly with his team, and he even went on radio to talk about it too. When we invited him on radio, are you open to sharing this during World Mental Health Month? And he happily did, right? So this modeling of leadership is the strongest determining factor of the success of an EAP program in an organization. So it doesn't have to be a CEO level, it can also be one of the C levels, but basically when you put a powerful person in the position of vulnerability, it really touches the hearts of the employees. They feel like actually if they look like they have it all and they are struggling, so maybe it's okay for me to struggle too, right? And this is how it starts to build that culture of psychological safety that you mentioned earlier, right? That it's okay for me to talk about my difficult moments as well.
I think role modeling is extremely important. And I mean, I've always known that as a leader, like for myself, like I'm managing a team of 15, I've always known that it's important to role model it. But I think sometimes I misunderstand that this role modeling can be in the smallest ways. It doesn't have to be, oh, during a town hall and you talk about the importance of mental health and supporting each other. And I wanted to share with you this another moment of realization that I had as a relatively young leader at the time. And I noticed that when my team, so I have a room, and my team would often just walk into my room to ask me like all sorts of questions, pick my brain on something. We would like brainstorm problems and solutions and stuff like that. And I noticed that when they walk into my room, I know that they're not scared of talking to me. Like, we have a very open culture. But even then, when they just walk into my room, and I would sense from their face, you know, like when you look at someone's body language, you can tell they feel uncomfortable. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out why. Because the conversation would happen well, they would be supported, and we don't like throw our team members under the bus. And if anything, if there is any kind of disagreements with clients, we would take our employees' side on it, right? We will try and justify and see their logic of the way they do it and stuff like that. And I think a while later, I started doing just a little bit of difference in the way that I respond. So when they walk into my room, they say, "Em, do you have a minute?" I will actually look up and look at their face and say, "Yeah, sure, come in," right? Because before this, if let's say I'm doing work like this, right, and you look like super serious doing work, and they come in, I'm like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So in my heart, you are very ikhlas, right? Come lah, sure, I'll help you with your work. But your body language doesn't show that, and they are responding to your body language. So I noticed that to role model wellness at work, it can also just be your face, make it more welcoming, your body language when a team member is talking to you. Maybe don't have your laptop open and don't glance at your phone every 5 minutes. And just by doing that, they can actually be more present in the conversation as well. And more importantly, as a leader, I can be more present as well, because then I can pick on these clues that we keep talking about, right? Sometimes we agree on something, and then I look at their face and they don't feel that comfortable. Now I pick up on that and I'll ask, do you have any concern about that? We can try a different way, for example, right? And I think role modeling can also be something as simple as that, because leaders always think that, oh, role modeling means I have to do all these big grand gestures, but actually it's not. It's just in the day-to-day of how you talk to your team members, right?
It's the little things, right?
Betul. How do you feel about this phrase, right? There's this phrase that's becoming more common, that is human-centered workplace. If let's say it is completely up to Amalina Davis to kind of like curate corporate structures, and what would a human-centered workplace look like to you?
It would be a workplace where each employee will feel seen, heard, and supported. So these are the three main elements in order to put the human first. Rather than looking at them as a human resource, we look at them as human beings. And this is a lot of research in the recent years, I would say in the last 5 years, have been centered around this theory called the whole person approach theory. It's when you look at an employee as a whole individual rather than who they show up at work. They are also who they are back home. They are also who they are within their different relationships with their bosses, with their supervisees, with their children, with their spouses. So having that whole person approach will bring empathy and understanding in every single action that you do at the workplace. And that is where it's lacking at the moment. So I'll give a bit of an example, perhaps from our own experience in travel, where how this whole person approach is applied in. So we had one colleague who had to take extended time off over a month because of caregiving duties. She had an ailing father. So when this conversation happened, we discussed with the team, how can we distribute the workload equally? And this is a conversation between her and her direct manager, but also with the direct manager to all the team members to let them know, okay, she is struggling at this moment. But of course, you get the consent first before you share all of this. And then how can we help support her? So how can we divide up the tasks to maybe the 5 team members that are around? So when you have this kind of like equity, right? Like you are taking responsibility for your other team members' challenging period, it makes them feel very supported, and it builds loyalty. And I think this is something that we've kind of lost along the way in our organization, that is our culture of always jumping to the next best thing, the next best job.
Yeah.
This concept of loyalty. So how do you build loyalty in employees is that, like, showing genuine care and showing genuine support through whatever period that they're going through. So, and this is also good role modeling, as we talked about a lot about role modeling, right? When you show to the other team members that if I'm struggling, this is kind of the support that I will get from my team members. So that builds the culture of psychological safety, So this is, I would say, one of the best ways to do it.
I really like this whole person approach, and I think it fits into the conversation on DEI that we have right now. And a lot of the times, people talk about, I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a lot of conversations that we're having with our clients right now centers around inclusion, and they're asking, oh, how do we make our team members or our employees feel included at work, right? And also, if you look at research now on inclusion, we are moving from just talking about inclusion and we're talking about a sense of belonging. And then there's this there's this contradiction. On one hand, we always advise or we always hear this narrative that don't say, oh, at work, oh, we are like a family, because that's not appropriate. But at the same time, if you want to create a sense of belonging, there must be a sense of home to it, right? And I think this is the contradiction that a lot of people don't know how to resolve. They are seen as these opposing ideas. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that you have to create inclusion and sense of belonging, not by saying that, oh, we are all family here, and therefore automatically you will have a sense of belonging. If you were to unpack what does it mean to have this feeling of home, is actually a place where you can be yourself, a place that, like you said, you feel heard, you feel seen, you feel supported no matter what you're going through, right? This idea that no matter what happened, I have your back. And that is, I think, something that is completely missing in the corporate culture that we talk about right now. And I want to bring in also another perspective that might be a little controversial. And this is where I feel like our Asian culture and our Asian value is in our favor, to help us achieve this sense of belonging and this sense of inclusion. Because there's this research that established what we call the Hofstede cultural dimension. And the first part of the dimension is power distance, which is something that is often talked about. And the second part of it is the spectrum between a sense of community and individualism. And if you look at the country profile, and you would see like Asian countries would be higher on the sense of community, and a lot of Western countries would be higher in terms of like individualistic nature of the way that they operate as a society. And a part of me have always tried to explore this. So how can we capitalize this sense of community that we have in our country, in any Asian country, that is very high? We have this sense of responsibility and sense of community. So how can we leverage on that to kind of like create this sense of inclusion and sense of belonging at work that would ultimately allow you to see your team members and your employees as this whole person? Because the divorce between the two is kind of like what's creating this gap in the way that we serve our employees, providing them the mental health support that they so require, right? So having said this, when we also discuss like the Hofstede cultural dimension, power distance, sense of inclusion, belonging, sense of community, and all of that, there's always this question about the role of leadership in all of this. And how can a leader basically change their day-to-day behavior or micro habits that would impact someone's mental well-being or mental health in a more positive way, right? And also this leveraging on what you said earlier, and that is your team lead actually have a huge impact on your mental health. So I want you to share with us perhaps some tips and tricks of small but powerful changes that leaders and team leads can take to achieve this inclusion, sense of belonging, and all that.
I think it's all about the little things, like what you talked about earlier. Sometimes it's just your face, and sometimes it's just the way you approach your employees, right? So having regular check-ins that is not asking about work actually is one of the easiest ways to do it. So I shared earlier about how in Tribal we do weekly or bi-weekly check-ins on an individual level, to just making sure that we understand where their current level of mental health is and how can we as leaders support that, right? So make it normal to talk about stress or workload. I think there's a lot of taboo about if I'm struggling at work and I must not talk about it. But actually, without these conversations, it's very hard for the leadership to gauge whether any adjustments need to be made at the workplace in terms of the workload, right? And also as leaders, to be able to respect your employees' time outside work. Sometimes I feel like in the more traditional kind of corporate culture, you feel like, I've experienced where I felt like my manager feels like they own my time in and outside of work. So they can reach out to me anytime and I must be always on demand. And that actually fuels a lot of my anxiety, which eventually led to my own experience of burnout in the corporate world. So as a leader, to be able to respect that, your employees also have other roles to play. So respect that they need time to do that outside of work as well. And also to set a good example by yourself switching off after work. If you are always on, if you're always doing work, then how can you expect your employees to feel respected in their own time, right? And not micromanaging. I think leaders who are generally, some leaders tend to be a bit more anxious, and they feel like if they are not micromanaging, the work doesn't get done. And I think that really kills trust. That kills the ability to be psychologically safe in a team, because you feel like your leader is always looking over your shoulder. So you don't feel like they trust you. So that doesn't work well with well-being, right?
I wanted to share, I think, a couple more. I really like what you have said. One of the things that we tell our leaders, when we train clients and stuff like that, is how do you change your micro habits in conversation to create psychological safety and to create a sense of inclusion and belonging. The first one is when your team members come to you for guidance, for mentorship, they're in any kind of trouble, you don't jump straight to giving instructions. You don't jump straight to problem solving, troubleshooting. And what you should do instead is ask a series of questions. First, you could either maybe find out what happened and all of that. But even after you found out everything that you needed to know about the situation at hand, don't jump straight into giving them the solution. Instead, what you should do is ask them facilitating questions to train them into knowing how do they come up with a solution. And the reason that this is very important is because a lot of the times leaders come to me and they will say, can you train my team and make them a bit more proactive? They don't know how to solve problems, and they don't know how to, they just don't have a sense of ownership. You have all these words like ownership, accountability, proactiveness, all being thrown around. And I will ask them, so when your team members come to you and they tell you basically there's a problem, what is your knee-jerk reaction? Is your knee-jerk reaction to scold them and then give them the solution? But because most of them would actually just go straight into, okay, this is what you do, A, B, and C, right? And the problem with this is you're creating a culture where your team members will rely on you, on your brain, to think of the solution instead of relying on their own capacity. And this actually contributes to the lack of trust. But in this situation, it's not the boss they don't trust, it's not the leader they don't trust themselves. Because the solutions never come from them, and their boss always jump to rescuing them. And as a result, they would grow older and go through the entire career journey, never developing instinct and trust that they themselves can develop all that. So once people trust themselves a little higher, or trust is increased, then you will see them speaking up for themselves a little more. Then they will have the confidence to draw boundaries or have conversations about boundaries. Otherwise, this will never happen. So that's one of the things that we have identified. It's not sometimes a lack of skill. It's not sometimes a lack of awareness. It's not that your employees don't know that my personal time is mine, and how to draw boundaries and all of that. It's just that they have been living in this environment where they are taught to second guess themselves. They are treated like they don't know how to think of a solution. They're not smart enough and all of that. And that contributes to the lack of trust. And the second thing is, and I doubt this as my best advice to creating psychological safety, and that is when your team member submit any kind of work to you. Let's say they send you an email, they say, Amalina, here is the deck as we discussed, I've made the changes, if all is good, I will send it to our client, for example. And most people would respond to this email by saying, thanks, there's some mistake on slide 14, please improve that. Once that's done, you can send this out. That's it, right? But what I encourage leaders to do is before you go into your feedback mode to say this is wrong, improve this, you must always stop to recognize and validate. So what your email should sound like now is, hey, thank you for this deck. I really appreciate the thought process that you put into this, and I especially like the recommendations that we're providing for our client. On slide 14, though, there's a bit of a mistake with the data. Can you please update that and then send it out to the client? The difference between the first email response and the second email response is one sentence.
Yeah.
I just added one sentence where you kind of show your appreciation towards the work. But the value of that is immense because it completely changed your leadership culture. It completely changed your leadership environment. And your team now knows that when they go to you, they will always be first met with a response that will validate them as opposed to a response that is critical of them, right? And the common pushback that I will receive is, there are two things here. One, they will say, and you know, I'm a leader, I'm so busy, I don't have time to like thank them for all this and all this like flowery language, right? I would just give them the feedback, to which I will say, I understand leaders are busy, so do it as much as you can, as your time permits. And the second pushback that we often hear about this is they will say, but this doesn't sound like me. If I were to suddenly start sending an email, thank you all, appreciate and everything, my team would think that someone, hacked into my email and somebody else is sending my email on my behalf, right? And to that pushback, I often ask these leaders back a question. And the question is, if sounding positive doesn't sound like you, then what do you sound like? And I think this is often the time that they will be like, have a kind of realization that, sure, I'm saying my team don't take ownership over the work, they're checked out and they're not like at a level in which I want them to contribute. And I think a moment of humility in leaders to stop and ask, what am I doing that's causing this? And what can I change to do this? I think that's very important. And we always invite leaders to do the two things. So don't jump to giving instructions. And number two is always recognize and validate first before you give any kind of feedback. And I think that would be like a few steps closer to achieving that psychological safety and the sense of belonging. I want to go into the final question that we want to ask you in this conversation today. From the beginning until now, we have talked a lot about the theory of like this one whole person, a role of leadership, the gaps in corporate structures and all of that. And there's so many things, so many tips and tricks that we have shared as well. If, let's say, the listeners out there don't pay attention, they forget everything that we have said, what would be the one thing, the one important takeaway that you want them to have from this session today?
I would say we talked a lot about leadership, right? And I would like kind of to wrap it all up is there's this idea that leadership is actually self-awareness work, right? Great leaders, what differentiates them from good leaders is they are very self-aware, right? So good leaders deliver results, but great leaders, they are able to deliver results and be self-aware in how they are building relationships with their team. And if there was one takeaway, I would say the underlying that can improve the success of bringing wellness into the workplace is having self-aware leaders. Being able to recognize how you are reacting and what you are bringing to the table in terms of your leadership and how you are impacting your team members, and also how do we create and model more of the self-awareness behaviors across. So it really starts from internal work, and it's the same with any mental health work that we do, even in therapy or counseling sessions. It's all about building your own self-awareness, because once you're self-aware, you can course correct. And as leaders, there's no doubt that you are capable. That's how you rose to positions of leadership, right? But how do you then pick up on all of these little things that is hampering your progress of yourself and your team, and then you course correct and pick a different way to change the micro habits that are ineffective, for example. So if I could wrap up, it would be building that level of self-awareness within yourself to become better leaders.
I love that. I want to supplement that with this idea of understanding what truly is your priority as a leader. And a bit of shout out as well. Right now, in the world that we live in, people always say, what are your top 3 priorities? And I was surprised when I found out that when the word priority was first created, it doesn't have a plural form. It's just priority. It's a word that is meant to denote like the one and only priority, because the moment you have priorities, then nothing is a priority anymore, right? So in the same spirit, I would like to encourage leaders to realize that you only have one priority. And it's not to deliver results. It's not to be in charge of the work anymore. The one priority that you have is your team. And there's also this very important analogy, and that is, let's say you used to work as a website developer, and your responsibility is to develop websites. But then you become a leader. Now your job is not to build the websites yourself, but your job is to facilitate your team so they can build the website, because you are no longer in charge of the website. And I want to quote Simon Sinek again, and he said that, when you ask CEO, oh, what is your priority? And they answer things like, oh, my priority is my customers. And I chuckled when I hear that, because as a CEO, when was the last time you speak to a customer? Like, I don't interact with a customer, I don't interact with leads and all of that. So why is customer a priority? So truly, I think on top of building the self-awareness that you talk about, on top of role modeling, is to realize that you only have one job. And that one job is to make sure that you can facilitate, empower, and help your team members to deliver the work that they are supposed to. And until you realize that, you will always be able to not be able to step away from the work, and hence you will have things like leaders who micromanage, leaders who is a bit overpowering and stuff like that. So realizing that to be your true north now as a leader, I think is very important. Leaders are responsible for the people, and the people are responsible for the process, and the process should deliver the results that you want, and you shouldn't be jumping that to saying that you are ultimately responsible for the outcome, right? So that would be the last thing that I want to leave our listeners with. And I hope that the conversation has been helpful to those listening. And I want to end this session with a quick plug that MIDP and Thrive Well actually will be organizing a public training session. The conversation will be touching a lot of what we're talking about here, about emotional intelligence, and how do we create the soft skills to support that, on top of all of the things that Amalina has also talked about. And I hope that you will check it out, get more information. We would love to see you there, and you will have a good time, I promise you that. And Lynn, any final words to the audience?
I hope to see you there at the training.
I hope to see you there too. So thank you so much, everyone. This is PowerUp Podcast, brought to you by MIDP and together with Thrive Well. Hope to see you again next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.